By 2097, Vault 15's population could no longer fit inside their shelter. While some of them stayed behind, others looted the vault's resources and fled into the desert, including Jonathan Faust, who over 200 people decided to follow. For weeks they walked, huddled together, until they discovered a small refuge around a large pit. Shortly after making camp and settling in for the night, Faust was alone, observing the pit, when someone spoke to him from the shadows, which startled him, causing him to lose his footing and fall inside. Free-falling for almost 40 feet, Faust landed on something soft. Although he did break his leg, he lay there, surprised to still be alive, when the something soft started moving. Pushing himself up as best he could, he soon saw what had broken his fall, a nest of giant pit vipers. And these vipers were hungry, and in the time it took Faust to let out a single scream, which the others heard, he was gone. The others called out to Faust, but he didn't respond. So 3 people went down to see if he was okay, but none of them came back. And now 200 plus people were left without a leader, and their supplies were dwindling, and to make matters worse, over 1/4 of their group was suffering from radiation poisoning. Those who were strong enough left to get help, but they never returned, either dying to the elements or to raiders, or maybe they had found somewhere better to be and didn't feel like sharing it with the others. Either way, those near the pit were doing their best to come up with a plan. They thought about trying to make contact with another group from the vault, those who would later be known as the NCR, the Khans, and the Jackals. They even discussed whether or not they could go back to the vault. This talk went on for 1 week before they decided to move. That was until they were halted in their tracks by a pale, emaciated Faust, whose eyes were gleaming with fever. At first, Faust only stared at them, as if taking in the very fact that his people were about to abandon him, and then he spoke. He told them what happened to him in the pit, but what he said was utter madness. He said that he was visited by a god and learned of the true way, and this true way was going to require sacrificing people to the children of the pit, which would satiate the god's hunger, and in return they would become incredibly powerful. The others looked at Faust with worried eyes, and he knew they doubted him. So as if by magic, he unleashed 2 giant pit vipers and laughed maniacally as they attacked him and the terrified dwellers. After the chaos had settled, the pit vipers had been killed by Faust, over 100 people were dead, and the rest of them, with mutated venom in their veins, were on the verge of dying. That afternoon, only 40 people were still breathing, survivors maddened by the viper's venom, but considered chosen by the great snake. And so Faust guided them through their fever dreams and nightmarish hallucinations, where on the other side they were reborn as the Vipers in what would later be known as the Great Awakening. This newfangled faction built a shrine around the pit and began sacrificing any wastelander they found who refused to join the winding way of the Great Snake, which is a great time to talk about the intricacies of the Vipers. Sacrifices were frequent, and prisoners were thrown into the pit almost every night to appease the Great Snake. The prisoners that survived their encounter with the pit vipers were given the chance to join the group. In the event they agreed, they would be expected to complete a task, anything from robbing a caravan to clearing a nest of rad scorpions. Those who completed the task were considered a part of the group and given the same level of respect as any other viper, shortly after which they would receive countless tattoos and exotic piercings expressing their loyalty to the Great Snake. As a group, they primarily raided at night as they preferred stealth to brute force, wearing bone armor which was light and made it easier to sneak, created from strips of bone wrapped tightly in leather, but was still strong enough to protect them from simple attacks. Armor which all Vipers, including the leader, the Great Snakekeeper, would wear. The only unique apparel worn within the group would be the leader's snakeskin cape and skull helmet. They also had a variety of melee weapons made from bone, laced with paralytic pit viper venom, capable of incapacitating targets who they would then rob and take back to the pit to be converted or sacrificed, depending on whether or not they survived. Those who joined started at the bottom of the ranks. At the very top is the Great Snake and his children, the giant pit vipers. Beneath them is the Great Snake Keeper, the official leader. In this case, it's Jonathan Faust. Then there's the high priests and priestesses who are just above the Crimson Tongues, the elite warriors of the group. And finally, at the bottom, we have the rest of the vipers. Everyone of maturity partook in monthly rituals where they ingested cocktails of alcohol mixed with venom, which, when drank, would place the consumer in a coma, which they weren't guaranteed to wake up from. Within 7 days of drinking the venomous mixture, if you hadn't woke up or had died, then you were taken to the pit and fed to the gods. Those who survived the ritual were labelled as chosen ones or warriors of the snake and continued to serve until the next month, where they would do it all over again. The priests and priestesses would undergo a separate but just as deadly ritual, taking small quantities of undiluted venom to induce delirium and hallucinations. This was called the time of the summoning, as they would claim to have seen the great snake in their dreams, although only they knew if they were telling the truth. 28 years after the Great Awakening, the Vipers had become incredibly powerful, but this power would fade into obscurity, as with the Vipers themselves, and it all started with a failed raid on the hub. Thinking the formative town would be an easy target, the Vipers attacked, but its founder and governor, Angus, rallied the townsfolk and fended off the assault, forcing the Vipers into a shameful retreat. Although they had failed to take the hub and sacrifice its people, they were hardly done serving their god, and returned to snatching wastelanders and attacking caravans, and sometimes small settlements, albeit with more success than the hub raid. But their numbers were still few, and replenishing those they had lost would take a very long time. So Faust started taking slaves, keeping those who didn't want to join and forcing them to serve instead. And with these slaves, their numbers increased drastically to the point where finding enough supplies to feed them all became a real challenge. So they moved further north into the Badlands, south of Lost Hills, and intensified their raids. For a long time, the Vipers ruled the roads, with merchant caravans and frontier settlements falling in their wake, and their pit god granted them boon after boon. Years later, when Faust had grown too old and weak to lead, he was replaced by High Priest Asp, who was also his son, and he was far more aggressive and determined than his father ever was. Now I know what you're thinking, does that mean that other Vipers were allowed to have children? And the answer is yes. But the only difference between themselves and the adults was the children were not allowed to partake in the rituals until they had reached maturity. Once they had, they would partake in the passage into adulthood, which was virtually identical to the monthly ritual. Under new leadership, the raids led by Asp were successful, yet belligerent, and they caught the attention of the Brotherhood of Steel, who decided the Vipers would best serve as cannon fodder for new recruits. So, Maxon II, son of Roger Maxon, and father of John Maxon, led a squad of trainees against the Vipers, whose weapons, spears and arrows were no match for their impenetrable power armor, so many of them died, and the survivors retreated into the hills out of sight. Satisfied with the results, Maxon II removed his power helmet, only to be nicked by a poison arrow, which would later kill him. In retaliation, head paladin Rhombus, with many knights by his side, ruthlessly pursued the Vipers into the mountains. Within a month, Rhombus and his group of knights had pretty much wiped out the Vipers altogether. Only a handful of them were left alive to pass over the mountaintops to safety. Those that survived the Brotherhood's brutal purge went one of two ways. One group would return to California to take their chances, only to be harassed by the NCR. The other continued east towards Denver, eventually becoming a slave tribe to the Zealots of Hecate, which is a video for another time. But those who remained on the border of California, retaining their tribal name, clung to existence, but never managed to reach the level of prominence they once had, due to the NCR stepping in after the Brotherhood's purging and keeping their numbers pitifully small, with officers using any Viper they encountered as target practice. It is unknown if Asp fell to the Brotherhood, or the NCR, or headed east and became a Hound of Hecate. Either way, Asp isn't mentioned again, and those who were left returned to their old ways, skulking in the mountains of the Mojave and targeting small, unsuspecting caravans, which is enough for them, for now. But without their distinct culture, they have become like any other unrecognizable group of raiders. Their bone armor is nowhere to be seen, having been replaced with scavenged merc outfits and stolen metal armor, and their arrows and spears have been swapped out for poorly maintained firearms. As it stands, the Vipers are a far cry from their former selves, and it's a real shame because they were mentioned several times in Fallout 1, leading many to believe they could be found in the game, but they couldn't. Instead, they were mentioned in the Fallout Bible, and then intended to be a part of Van Buren, but that game was cancelled, leaving fans wondering if they would ever see the Vipers. Then Fallout 3 was released, and inside the Citadel, a terminal entry mentioned the Vipers. However, just like Fallout 1, they couldn't be found in the game. It was only after Fallout New Vegas was released did the Vipers finally make an appearance, 13 years after they were first mentioned. But instead of a snake cult with giant pit vipers, bone armor, venomous weapons, and a great snake god, we got another group of ordinary raiders. If Fallout New Vegas 2 were ever to exist, or another Fallout game on the West Coast were to happen, which is always a possibility, I truly hope the Vipers return. And this time, they pose a real threat to the Wasteland, and aren't just there to serve as filler while completing other quests. Be sure to show your support by liking the video and subscribing if you haven't already for more Fallout content. If there's anything you would like to see in a later video, leave a comment and I'll see what I can do. With that said, thank you, as always, for watching, and I'll see you in the next adventure.